The ninth chapter features tools, resources, and guidance for evaluating the effectiveness of a district's English learner program. Next slide, please. The tools and resources in Chapter 9 are intended to assist schools and local and state educational agencies in evaluating English learner programs and services. The tools provide guidelines and specific examples of program elements to evaluate. Over the last few years, OELA developed and published a number of resources on the topic of ensuring the quality of English learner programs. During the Back to School, Aligning Structural and Instructional Practices to Promote English Learner Success webinar, presenters from the Office of English Language Acquisition, Department of Justice, and Regional Education Laboratories, West, engaged in a lively discussion on administering English learner programs and instruction in preparation for the 2020-2021 school year. Panelists reviewed the Equal Educational Opportunities Act in the context of English learner education, presented a theory of action that reflected both the legislative context and foundations for English learner education, presented a sample of evidence-based instructional practices for English learners that support rigorous teaching and learning, and addressed systemic actions and leadership strategies that participants may use to support educators within their context. In the recent Developing Educator Expertise to Work with English Learners webinar hosted by OELA in collaboration with the National Research and Development Center to Improve Education for Secondary English Learners, panelists presented a model for the development of teacher expertise to serve English learners and shared multimodal resources to plan and implement high-quality professional learning in pre-service and in-service programs. The English Learners and Instructional Programs Fact Sheet reports on the availability of language instruction education programs in the United States and their access to English learners. The information elevated language instruction educational programs school year 2019 to 2020 data visualization offers a snapshot of data on English learners and their participation in language instruction educational programs, including bilingual education and dual language programs. This episode is based on data from EdFacts 116, 2019-2020, and Consolidated State Performance Reports from Section 1.4.2, school year 2019 to 2020. Several sections of the U.S. Department of Education's non-regulatory Title III guidance reference the effectiveness of programs supported by Title III funding. The Title III of the ESCA, as amended by ESSA, requires local and state educational agencies to report on a variety of key English learner-related measures. See Sections 3121 and 3122 of the ESCA. Those measures can be used to improve local and state programs for English learners. However, evaluation of an English learner program should not be limited to data required for ESCA accountability purposes. These resources and more can be accessed through the ENSELA website and through the links on the slide. Next slide, please. To recap, Chapter 9 of the English Learner Toolkit provides users with the guidance to periodically evaluate its English learner programs in order to determine the effectiveness of a local educational agency English learner program. The slide features some of the main points from Chapter 9. In the toolkit, additional guidance and information on evaluating the effectiveness of English learner programs are provided. We are now going to turn to our panel to discuss this topic further. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a discussion on Chapter 9. I am Celeste McLaughlin, and I am a NAM team leader in OELA at the Office of English Language Acquisition, that is, at the U.S. Department of Education. Joining us today are our three panelists, Sibel Hughes. She is the Assistant Director of the Office of Language Acquisition at the Massachusetts Department of Education. Nicole Knight is the Executive Director of English Language Learners and Multilingual Achievement at Oakland Unified School District. And Dr. Anala Timant is a second language education professor in the Urban Teacher Education Department at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Thank you so much for joining us, ladies. We'll dive right into our questions. Question 1. What data do you collect in addition to the CSPR data to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of your program?
I can get us started.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So Oakland is in California, of course, and California already requires a much more extensive set of data reporting than what I understand most states do, including measures of aspects such as student engagement. But what makes the data collection that we do locally in Oakland unique is the extent to which we disaggregate by certain particular groups of students to better understand who we are serving well and who we need to pay more attention to. So, for example, when we look at any of our indicators, whether it is movement on the English proficiency test or, say, graduation rates, we don't just disaggregate by English learner status, but also by language group, by housing status, by newcomer versus non-newcomer English learners. And this is important because, as we know, our English learners are not a monolith. And by not disaggregating, we run the risk of making broad assumptions around our English learner performance and missing critical information that would help us provide targeted services. And just another quick example is the evaluation of bilingual learning. So unfortunately, we don't have measures at the state level, at least in California, to examine our effectiveness in the partner language learning, which in this case of Oakland is Spanish. And so we gather data on Spanish literacy and look at the data side by side to examine how students are performing or whether they're performing within the biliteracy zone, which is a concept we borrow from Kathy Scamia's work, in which we look at students who are on grade level, on or above grade level in one language, and within a year of grade level in the second. And finally, we collect a robust set of implementation data on program and quality instruction, which I can speak to a little bit more later.
Thank you, Nicole. Anala?
I'm in a different position than Sibel and Nicole in that I'm a university person who often partners with school districts. So mine is maybe a direction towards things I wish we were gathering and looking at rather than the compliance level. I'm always excited to hear when districts like what Nicole was saying are going beyond those basic standards in terms of compliance data. But I do feel overall nationally, we need to be much more thoughtful about what it means to gather meaningful data of around teaching and teachers. In my work with districts, I collect data focused on understanding teachers' competencies for working with multilingual learners. So it isn't just about teachers' knowledge of language, but it's knowledge of language, culture, pedagogy, and especially equity-mindedness. So I use those variables in my research with districts. I gather teacher knowledge variables through surveys or classroom observations to better explain the variance we see in student performance. So I feel like the only way we can really close the gap or take a radical jump forward in our field is to pay more attention to the district to the teacher and teaching variables that we're looking for, and then making those relationships through our research and evaluation programs to see which variables are on par and making a difference and closing the gap. And that takes a complete programmatic view instead of just looking at student outcomes.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Anala. I have your names out of order since we didn't start with Sibel. Sibel, will you please join us in? And let me just rephrase the question because I'm not sure if you heard. What data do you collect in addition to the CSPR data to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of your program?
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here. I think I was forgotten in the backstage, so nice to be back here. So I'm representing the state of Massachusetts, so I will share how we use data to monitor and evaluate district programs. In Massachusetts, our department adopted a tier-focused approach to review districts' English learner education programs. Basically, we place our districts in 4 different tiers based on the data, and that's how we determine the effectiveness of their ELE programs and the level of assistance districts need from us to improve their English learner outcomes. The most important data for tier placement comes from Access, showing how much growth students have made in language acquisition, in English language acquisition. Then we look at other indicators such as state's core content assessment, MCAS data, showing the academic achievement of ELs and FELs in content areas. We look at English learner graduation rates, dropout rates, suspension rates. We look at data showing ELs identification for special education services to see whether the rate of ELs with disabilities mimic that of non-ELs. If districts get flags for some of these additional indicators, then their tier placement can go 1 or 2 levels below. So this approach gives us an opportunity to see the big picture before we even start a program review process in districts. Also, in Massachusetts, our department annually determines the English language proficiency benchmarks for individual ELs and provides the information to districts every fall. This is basically the target number each student needs to meet in order to make sufficient yearly progress in English language acquisition. Based on this data, districts are required by the state law to identify students who have not met their benchmarks, which also helps how well to understand how well their English learner program is doing and how successful the program is. So based on that information, of course, districts also identify the areas of improvement for students and establish personalized goals for them to work on throughout the year. So that's the data that we consider for the evaluation of the programs.
Thank you so much, Sibel. Now we'll move on to our second question. What is your process to evaluate the effectiveness of your program? We'll start with Nicole.
Sure. So all LEAs in California are governed by what is called the Local Control Accountability Plan, or LCAP. We always love an acronym, in which community provides input into the goals and aligned investments based on our performance. And so at the end of each year, we do a thorough analysis of both how students are performing across grade level spans, differing language programs, and subgroups of English language learners, as I indicated earlier. And to do this in Oakland, we established key performance indicators. We have some beautiful dashboards, KPI dashboards specific to English language learners, as well as, of course, other groups of students. And we examine the data points that will best illuminate the efficacy of our language acquisition programs, data very similar to those that are used in Massachusetts that Sibel mentioned. But in addition to the student outcome and growth data, we also assess the quality of program and instruction, which is more focused, of course, on the practices of the adults in the system. And most importantly, the practices that are showing up in teaching and learning in the classroom, right? We have to be grounded in what is the instructional practice? How is this reaching the classroom? That is where transformation happens. And so to this end, we've developed a number of tools and processes that are grounded in an instructional vision articulated in Oakland Unified. And we call these the 5 essential practices for L achievement. I'll list the practices briefly. They're ensuring access and rigor, providing quality designated and integrated in ELD or English language development, grounding decisions at the instructional and programmatic level in meaningful data. Fourth is taking an asset-based approach. And fifth is addressing the whole child through social emotional learning, trauma-informed practices, and other manners. So we use a variety of processes to engage in this evaluation. One key process, which is we think about depth and breadth, right? We're a relatively large district. And so to go broad and make sure that we're looking at all schools, we require schools to engage in a self-assessment designed for site-based instructional leadership teams around the implementation of quality designated and integrated ELD, really focusing on that core instructional practice. And it asks leadership teams to examine the structures and systems at their site that provide the enabling conditions, as well as the instructional practice evident in the classroom. That's one major continuous improvement process we use. The second is we engage, this is the deep part, going deep with a smaller number of sites. We use a more comprehensive, we call it the L review, and it's aligned to the 5 essential practices that I named. And it really centers around classroom observations, but also includes interviews and focus groups with students and families, leaders and teachers.
Thank you so much. Anala?
So monitoring can only be future oriented if there's a feedback loop into our systems, into the policies, into the practices, into the programs, resources, and the teacher learning that we have decided as part of our explicit plan for improvement. I think, though, to be consistent with my message on our neglect of the teacher learning side of that, I'm not saying we neglect engaging teachers in teacher learning. We offer PDs all the time, but we don't match those PD efforts with a high quality evaluation of those efforts. We don't have often measures that could substantiate this, this cohesive, sustained systems of support. We're supposed to have that for students, right? But we also need that long-term commitment and sustained perspective for what we're doing with teachers. So we first need a shared and cleared vision, and I really appreciated how Nicole was talking about that at her site. But we also then need to make sure that that plan is for generalists as well as specialists. We have to have plans in both places, of course. And we have to know what teacher competencies our student gaps suggest need more work. So we've had many models of professional development, some solely focused on language. Well, we've had some 25 years of practice with some models, and we know that that is not closing the gap. So again, this important for us to think about what are the inputs to teacher learning and how do they connect or meet the gaps we've identified in student outcomes. If there's not a gap between that teacher learning and the student outcomes, then you're doing PD for PD's sake, to look like you're doing something without a clear outcome. And I'll just add one more thought, because I'm sure I've gone over a little bit, but I really am concerned about the rollout of our teacher PD. Is it longitudinal? Is it sustained? And do we have those measures aligned?
Yes, definitely. Sibel?
Sure. We have 6-year review cycles in Massachusetts, and we use a self-assessment tool we developed based on the Castaneda's 3-pronged test to evaluate the effectiveness of English learner education programs. Each prong of the Castaneda's test includes prompts designed to help districts self-evaluate their ELE programs. So using this test, districts determine whether the English learner education program in the district is designed and implemented to meet the academic and linguistic needs of the L population. So every district is required to go through this self-assessment process every 6 years. They also review their documentation and their student records to make sure that they are in compliance with state and federal laws and regulations. After the review of this self-assessment submitted by the districts, our team then evaluates the effectiveness of their programs by reviewing their documentation, student records, conducting classroom observations, collecting data, using parent surveys, meeting with parents and students in focus groups, and also conducting interviews with staff. But in Massachusetts, we actually go beyond this basic evaluation system, which I'm quite proud about. A few years ago, as a part of our quest to serve English learners in a better capacity, we adopted a vision for English learner success and a framework developed based on this vision. Our framework, or blueprint as we call it, focuses on school culture that prioritizes shared responsibility, effective family engagement, and asset-based teaching and learning, access to effective, well-prepared, well-resourced, and culturally responsive educators, opportunities and supports we provide to our English learners, and also a plan for their future success, which is not only limited in our schools, but also in their life as members of the global community. We also have a self-assessment tool developed based on the state's vision for L success and the blueprint, so that we can understand our strengths and improvement areas at school, classroom, district, and state levels. So we have different assessment tools for each level. Our goal is not only to meet our legal requirements, but also to go beyond it and to understand much better how we can improve our practices to provide equitable learning opportunities for our English learners.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll move on to our next question. How do you use the results of the internal or external evaluation toward continuous improvement of the evaluation process? We'll go ahead and start with Nicole.
Okay, I think the operative word here is continuous improvement. And I just want to point out that by framing this as continuous improvement, it's really a paradigm shift, right? And so we're no longer talking about waiting for the moment we have to do our Title III reporting, or in the case of California, our LCAP reporting. We're not waiting until the end of the year, or really any specific point in the year, to evaluate our program and make improvement. Rather, we're constantly assessing whether our intentions and our efforts are yielding the desired results, and we're making adjustments along the way. So the way that we do that is through a cycle of inquiry process, both at the central level and at site levels. Our job as a central office is to support school sites in engaging in these ongoing cycles of inquiry around equity-based data for their Ls and multilingual learners. But we also have to do this as a central, right? Our central supports and the systems that we're designing, the professional development that we're providing, are they also yielding the results that are making it into, again, the classroom experience and ultimately student outcome and growth data? So in order to do that, it means we're gathering that quantitative and qualitative data. Again, the quantitative data is the student outcome and growth data that we can find on our dashboards. And our qualitative data includes the self-assessment results that I spoke to. Sounds very similar to Massachusetts as well. Classroom observations are just so important because, again, that's where the rubber hits the road. And patterns from focus groups, or sometimes we call these empathy interviews with teachers, with students and families. So we're also understanding the student experience the family experience. We sometimes use English language learner shadowing, right, to really go deep and understand that student experience. And support, again, it's not just us doing this to school sites, but helping them build their capacity to engage in these processes and these ways of assessing their own programs. So they're building their muscle, and we're supporting them to do that. And by doing that, we are able to identify, by looking at a whole suite of data, including these qualitative elements, we're better able to identify root causes for the results that we see, to reflect on these findings, and to set new goals, and therefore, planned aligned actions, and then to reflect along the way.
Great, great. Thank you so much. Amala?
I just have two, from the university to public school partnership perspective to share. One, I think we need to pay more attention to Hattie's Making Learning Visible research, where he says we're really looking at an effect size of 0.4 before we really see real world changes. And so using that kind of a standard of, and people can ask you, well, how do we do that across a whole huge district like Oakland, or if you're using classroom observation data in that? I found it very helpful to focus on demonstration school sites where you're putting your best, you're finding gaps, you're doing PD differently, and you're measuring it to that highest quality of high quality quantitative and qualitative measures coming to play. And from there, you can branch out when you find things that are addressing actual school student gaps in learning. The second thing I want to say is just mostly a reflection from the field. I think we have a system that over stresses or overemphasizes individual leaders. So we have the superhero superintendent who pays attention to ELs, but then when they're gone, their lifespan 5 to 10 years in the spot, not in life, but in the leadership role. Or we have a superhero district EL coordinator, or a principal who's phenomenal. And I think we need to do different branding of our systems. When a leader leaves, when a Sibel or a Nicole leave their positions, what we do should be so embedded that the person who comes in is carrying that vision on. Right now, I feel like whoever gets hired next, we're chasing some new string, some new, silver bullet that never really materializes that way. So we're doing lots of incremental change, but not radical or systemic change that would actually change the trajectory of our students' learning. And that takes a different kind of vision of leadership and carrying it on so every teacher is living these commitments, not just the leaders, for example.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your insight on that. Sibel?
Yeah, thank you. I agree that continuous improvement is the key word here. So I already mentioned that our districts go through a self-assessment process using the Castaneda test tool. This process gives an opportunity to our districts to step back, see the overall picture, and plan for improvement. So I think this is really crucial. Each prong that we have includes relevant questions for that part of the test. For instance, by following the prompts we have for the first prong, districts better understand whether their chosen program is considering the needs of the L population they have. They look at their L demographic data to make sure that their program is well planned to meet the needs of all student groups, such as newcomers, SLIFE, long-term Ls, right? They also self-evaluate their program by checking their compliance with requirements of educationally sound programs. Then they look at the second prong and they see if they really have the opportunity to implement their chosen program in fidelity. Do they have appropriate resources for the implementation? Do they have teachers, enough teachers to implement the program? Do they have ESL and content curricula? instructional equipment, materials. They have a chance to see what they are using basically for the implementation. And then they come to the prompt tree, then they have the opportunity to have a deep dive in data again and see what the student outcomes are, so that they can, plan action steps to improve their student outcomes. I also mentioned before that we have a database-based approach to our review system, and we place districts in different tiers. So this process is quite interesting, actually. If districts are placed at tier one and tier two, but still have some compliance issues, we assist them through a continuous improvement plan. If they are placed in tier three or four, then we work more closely with them and provide comprehensive technical assistance, sometimes in collaboration with other offices in the department, especially with the Office of State System of Support. At state level, Massachusetts' vision and blueprint for ELS success clearly defines the state's role to improve educational opportunities for ELS. Each year, we plan strategically to align our work to the blueprint and also to the department's vision. It is very important for our office to coordinate all of our work with our district leaders as well. So for that purpose, we have advisory groups we consult with about various projects our office works on. Our L directors are basically our best partners in our work to ensure that we continuously improve.
Great, great. Thank you so much to our panelists. I wish we had more time. The information you share, your expertise, your experiences, certainly invaluable. I think we're all richer for it today. So thank you for taking the time to share with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Celeste. Thank you, panelists, again. And thank you for helping to close us out. We do have one last closing remarks that we want to get to before we bring up that presentation. Just a quick reminder. If you are not a subscriber to Nexus, we would love to have you as one. And so you can do that by going to our website at ncela.ed.gov to become a Nexus subscriber. And also, please remember, we would love to have you follow us on our social media platforms. That would be Ask Ncela1 at Twitter, ed.oela on Facebook, and @oela on LinkedIn. And thank you again. You'll be receiving some information from us, a survey that we would love to have you complete so that we can continue to improve our services for the field. And we'll also be sending out some information about how to get a certificate of completion. So again, thank you. And please enjoy our last presentation.